Hey everyone! So, it's time for writing advice. You have probably noticed that I uploaded a very long recording in Bulgarian. You had zero idea what that it was if you speak English or anything that's not Bulgarian. So, this was my very long series of harsh writing advice, or why there is no Santa in publishing. Since I saw that people were reacting to that, I decided that it would be only fair to create an English version for people who don't really understand Bulgarian, so here we are. Just to brief you, today is a very lazy day for me, and it's a lazy day not because I am allowed to laze about, but because I have zero motivation to write. And I have zero motivation to write because yesterday I wrote like 10,000 words, and right now I just prefer to record this. So, I know I promised to go bit by bit in the recordings, but I want to tell you all harsh truths together so that you can hear this and change your mind on writing. Either be committed to writing or stop writing altogether. I know it sounds harsh, but hear me out. This is going to be a very long recording, probably not as long as the Bulgarian one is, but it will surely be very long. So I guess you probably have to pause it here and there because it will be a long one. But anyway, I hope to have you by the end having decided what you want to do with your writing, because this is very important. So to start off, let me tell you, whatever you see in the movies, it's fake. You know, all Hallmark movies used to have this leitmotif. I mean, I fucking hate this because you have a character doing a creative job, so it's either a photographer female or a writer female, and they have those amazing lives. They live in very expensive houses. They basically do whatever they want, and you just know it's hinted somewhere that they probably have a job and they get paid. Or there is this other motive and trope where you have the aspiring writer. Sorry about that. So it's the aspiring writer, and it's weird because you basically have people who are doing something which is not really something you can make a living out of, and they are depicted as if they have a full-time job but they never work, and they live an amazing glorious life, usually in the US or Canadian environment. This doesn't happen. So if you haven't already guessed by the accent, I am Bulgarian. Bulgaria is a small country on the Balkan Peninsula, which is in Europe, and Greece is to the south of Bulgaria, if that makes sense. So, I will be speaking mostly about my experiences of trying to be an author in Bulgaria, but most of those I will skip some of the things I told my Bulgarian listeners because they do not apply to you if you do not live in Bulgaria. But I'll be talking about more universal experiences, and one of those which really annoys me are all movies where you have writers in them. So, let me get this straight. Movies about writers are created by other writers, obviously. So, the reality of a writer there is fictional. By fictional, I mean that those people have invented an ideal environment where you will have the perfect conditions to become a writer. Why this is wrong? First of all, it never happens. So, if you happen to be one of the 5% of people who have never ever seen a movie about a writer in their life, let me break it down to you. You have a person. That person has a 9-to-5 job they hate, and they are actually doing other things. So they may be working as a cashier, they may be having an office job, anything but writing. What they do in their spare time, on and off, is write the novel. Not a novel, it's the novel, because it's a one single piece they had been writing for the past 5 to 15 years. And I'm saying 5 to 15 years because it's usually a very, very damn long time in all those movies. That masterpiece has been the dream of their life. They want to become a writer at some point, but they haven't finished the manuscript yet. They don't even have the first draft. What happens with those people is that all of a sudden they meet someone. It doesn't really matter who, because it depends on the movie, on the plot and whatever. But they meet someone, something happens, and they finish the draft they had been procrastinating for years in like 2 days. Afterwards, magically, they land a traditional publisher, and we see the end of the movie. That same person is already a famous writer. They have a queue of readers. They make a book premiere in one of the biggest bookstores in town, and they're already famous and they have a new career. They can quit their hateful 9-to-5 job and they live happily ever after. I'll be harsh here. This is utter bullshit. And by utter bullshit, I mean absolute, complete bullshit. So let me break it down why it doesn't work like that. First of all, I want to make a disclaimer, and I want you to really, really, really remember this. If you want to go writing, it would be expensive. And by expensive, I mean that editing, cover design, marketing, damn it, are very expensive. If I need to be honest, the most expensive thing of all of them is actually the marketing part. But you need that, because without all of those, you don't really have a book. You have a printed copy you cannot sell. But anyway, if you want to have a book and if you want to sell that book, you will need to pay for all those things, and to do that you need money. And you need to earn money in some way. So I would highly advise you not to quit your day job. But back to the Hallmark movie, or the Hallmark movie scenario I hate so much. First of all, I'll be very harsh, and my Bulgarian listeners reacted to this, but anyway, I'll probably need to record something about that. But anyway, I'm gonna summarize it for you. So, if you write something for more than 5 years and you haven't completed it yet, you have a problem. And I'm not saying challenge, I'm not saying an issue, you have a fucking problem. Why? Well, one of the reasons behind that is that writing, unless you are writing the next series of The Wheel of Time or Game of Thrones, doesn't really take that much time. And even for series like that, you should have at least the first book finished. I'll be giving an example with something you cannot really check because you don't speak Bulgarian, but still, my fantasy series took me 4 years to complete. And out of those 4 years, it was actually a year and a half of work. At the rest of the time, I was doing completely different things, and I was actually procrastinating writing, so it doesn't really count. But that series is 2,400 pages, A4 size. That's normal printing paper size. So that thing is huge, believe me. And it took me 4 years. And a normal novel is usually not that long. I mean, even the longest of the fantasy series, even The Lord of the Rings was actually 3 books. Yes, we have it in a single bound edition, which is huge, but actually Tolkien published those as 3 separate books, which are not that big. So if we count separate books, it's usually between 200 and 600 pages A5, which is the standard page format for a book. So if you have 600 pages A5, this is like 300 and something pages A4. And believe me, 5 years are more than enough for even the most complicated of stories to complete if you have only 300 pages. So, if you haven't completed your work in 5 years, if you have gone into the 6th year and you haven't completed that, you have a problem. And the problems can be several. First of all, one of the first problems you may have is that you are afraid of the outcome. And this is a good thing, because only fools are not afraid. But If you are afraid of the outcome, you should ask yourself why. There are a few options there. First, you may be afraid that whatever you wrote in there will not be received well, or you may not be received well for even writing, or that you may be rejected in the publishing process, or maybe that no one would read it. There are various options, but believe me, you will never know what will happen to that piece of writing unless you finish it. And if you don't finish it, you will have zero idea. And my experience shows that even the worst of first drafts can be edited into something better, but believe me, a big blank nothing cannot be edited into anything. So, what happens here? My idea here is that you should finish it if you have those doubts. There is the second idea of why you're not finishing, and this, my friends, is the worst thing that could happen to an aspiring writer. And I'm saying the worst thing because it actually means you're a fraud. I'm sorry I need to tell you this, but yes, mark my words. You are a fraud if you feel the following. You know, there is this kinds of people who think that being able to read and write automatically makes you a writer. I know such people. I'm sorry that I know such people, but they exist. And for some reason, they decide that being a creative person is something very fashionable, very interesting, amazing. So they decide to become a creative person. But you know, some creative endeavors are very easy to distinguish than others. For example, you have to have a certain amount of talent or technique to be able to create a sculpture or a painting, or to sing. I mean, anyone with ears can discern if you are singing Amazing Grace okay or falsely. Believe me, they can. Even if they can't sing themselves, you can actually hear a good singer and differentiate a good singer from a bad singer. Which means, in our case, that if you have someone with zero other talents, they may resort to writing. The reasons behind that are that, first of all, writing takes a lot of time. And this, in their case, is the best moment for them to play the creative person without actually being one. You know, those people who constantly talk about, you know, I'm writing this amazing piece, but it's not yet complete. Oh, it's so difficult to be a writer. Oh, I know such people. It's not cute, believe me. So, you have those people, it's not okay, we don't like it, especially people with actual talent. The other reason such people do that is that they enjoy the process but not the final result. And if they enjoy the process, they will keep doing this for as long as they can without finishing, because when they finish, the process is complete, they need to move on to the next stage and they don't want to. And you know, if you enjoy the process, there's nothing wrong with that, but there is something very wrong in you posing as a writer without actually being one. And here there is a bit of discrepancy by how the words author and writer are perceived in English and in Bulgarian. So I need to explain my logic. I know that English logic is completely different, but I'm Bulgarian, so I'm allowed to have a different logic. So, in Bulgarian, if you are a writer, this is an occupation, so you get money for it. So if you are a writer, you are published, or your writing brings you money. Author, on the other hand, is not an occupation. You are the author of the thing X you created. You don't necessarily get money, but you are automatically an author the moment you start writing, because you have created something. It doesn't really matter what. So, what happens? You have people who are pretending to be authors, but you never actually see any results. They haven't ever tried to publish anything to anyone because they are beyond this world. They are too talented, they are ahead of their time, and no one could possibly internalize whatever they are trying to do. So they keep writing, they keep whining that no one understands them and they don't have an audience, but they never share anything, never publish anything, and you would countlessly hear them whine about how hard it is to be a writer, how hard it is to publish. No, guys, it is hard, but it's not hard because of the reasons you put out. So, if you happen to fall into this trap, there is a third option. You may have a semi-completed manuscript, which is something, it's a common disease among writers who want to be perfectionists, by the way. But this is something that could kill your work before it was even born. Endless rounds of edits. And don't get me wrong here. So what's the difference between the person who is a fraud and the person who has a manuscript and goes through endless rounds of edits? The person who is a fraud actually wants everybody to regard them as a genius, as a creator, as someone who is different from them. He or she doesn't really show what they are doing. I mean, you don't really see the final product, you only hear about it. You never see any physical evidence that the product exists. It may never exist, by the way. I mean, I've heard people talk about having written something, thousands of pages of it. I've never seen that. I mean, I know such people. I've heard people talk about the sequel to their book for like 5 years. I've never seen that either. So, and yes, George Martin, I'm looking at you because we all know how that guy keeps telling us that the Winds of Winter is coming, and it's been coming for like 10 years, even before I started watching Game of Thrones, so I'm not buying that. But anyway, I digressed. So, if you are a fraud, you are fucking enjoying the process and you're enjoying that other people regard you as something better than them because you can supposedly create something. If you do that, I would highly advise you to quit writing, leave writing to people who actually want to tell stories, and find something else to brag about. And I have some suggestions. Instagram. It's full of idiots who post like weird pictures and get famous because of that. It will be very, very easy compared to you having to sweat and toil and write something, especially if you have zero talent. So leave this, please. For God's sake, leave it. But let's say that you do have some talent and actually you have been pondering on this first draft for quite some time. So the syndrome of the countless edits is something that some writers fall prey to. I'm saying some and not all because we are different. We have different workflows. So what is this actually? You know, everybody wants their work to be as good as it gets. Well, mostly if you love the work. So if you want to have a good work, a good book, you want to edit it. And there's the rub. You know, there is a moment when you need to stop editing the book because you can keep on editing on and on and on and on and on and on one the same thing over and over again for years. Why? You know, the reason why this is useless is that first of all, you should stop. At some point, this book needs to get out, and if you keep editing it over and over again, it will never get out. This is one of the reasons. The other reason is that you are fucking wasting your time you could actually use to write another story. And believe me, 2 is always better than 1, especially in writing. So, let me give you a few examples why countless edits doesn't really do you any favor. First of all, my recipe of actually not falling prey to this is that if you look at your text and you feel like you're going to throw up looking at it this time, it means the book is ready for the editor. Believe me, it is. So that usually happens to me after the 5th reading. I usually read my texts like 3 times. I will go over a 4th time depending on how complicated the text is, and around the 5th reading I just want to throw up. I don't want to see this text ever again, and I'm so annoyed with it that it's ready to go to the editor. So whenever you feel like that, you have two choices. Either leave the text to rest if you think that you haven't edited everything in it, or you just go and send it to your editor or publisher. There is no use of you keeping on with this. It's useless like that. So this is my recipe, and I try to keep up with this because otherwise I will fall prey to countless edits, and this is never going to be published. And as my usual motivational video channel says, and I mean they repeat that over and over again, is like, done is better than perfect. And in the writer world, done is always better than perfect. And this is the second reason why you shouldn't edit over and over again. And let me tell you this, the first book you write is always gonna suck compared to all the rest of the books you write. And this is because even if you have talent, and even if you don't, by the way, even if you have zero writing talent, the more you write, the better you'll become. Just talent makes it way easier to become better because you have it. I mean, I'm sorry to break it down to you guys, this is another no Santa moment, but if you don't have a talent for telling stories, there is no way you can make it. Yes, you may sell things, but it doesn't really mean that you can make it as a writer. I mean, as an effective writer in terms of having fans, having people like your work. You just do something for the sake of money, which is fine, but it doesn't really equal talent. I mean, sales and talent are two things that are not really mutually dependable, believe me. So this is one of the things you should avoid. I mean, countless edits. So let me tell you something about volume, so how many things you have written. The first thing you write, regardless of it is published or not published yet, it's always gonna suck. So for example, the first novel I ever wrote was a 100-page of handwritten text I wrote at 17. Back then, when I completed it, I was very proud of myself. Can you imagine? You're 17, you have completed a young adult story with a dash of crime scene investigation and mystery, and you're proud of yourself because this is one fucking 100 pages of a complete story. This was something very big for me. But on the other hand, as time progressed and I wrote many other books, things changed. I mean, the first book I wrote was no longer the one I was the most proud of. And it hit me last year when I actually found out the manuscript with the idea of editing it. And that was the moment when I actually decided to go through it and see what's wrong with it, and I was appalled. Okay, let me break it down to you so that you can have a good laugh with me. First of all, we have characters who are supposed to be like 16, 17 years old, but they actually behave like 45 years olds, and they actually talk like 45-year-olds. You have absolutely illogical switches of characters, like at one moment they are very scared, at the other moment they are absolutely brave. You have weird dialogue tags, I mean appalling dialogue tags. You have mostly dialogue and no description. You have no character motivation whatsoever. The story meanders here and there depending on what my readers wanted at the moment. And it basically doesn't work. Yes, it has potential, but it's not a good novel in the least. I mean, anything else I have written after that is better than this novel. Yes, I'm still proud of it because I completed it at 17, but if I want to publish it, I will need to rewrite the whole of it. And I actually have plans of rewriting it. I mean, I legitimately, sorry about that, my tongue today doesn't listen to me. I legit have plans to rewrite this. So, this is one example. Another example is my fantasy series. When I completed the first book, it was in 2018, which at the time of recording of this video is, let me calculate, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 6 years ago. I started the book 7 years ago. So when I wanted to publish this year, I was thinking that I'm going to read once and just send it out to my publisher. Guess what? I needed to read 3 times all 3 books that needed to be published together, plus a 4th time because there were some scenes I was not okay with, plus a 5th time when the typesetting was done. So you can imagine how many reads, and the whole thing, the whole 3 books I'm publishing now are 700 pages A4. So you can multiply that by 5 and see how much work that was. Why did I read them? First of all, because my style had changed. I didn't really know that I had changed so much in 6 years. I was writing most of the time, but I didn't think it was that much of a big deal. And it turned out it was. So I needed to fix things I was not okay with anymore. So that was one of the reasons. I wanted to fix plot holes. Some of them were found at the typesetting stage, by the way. I wanted to fix a ton of things. I wanted to have the story as good as it can get. And it is okay to do that, but you just need to put an end to that at some point and move on. And take it out that the next book you're going to write is probably going to be much better than the one you have now. But if you have more things completed, it will totally make you a better writer. So, let me elaborate on that, because this is one of my favorite things to do. Explain why working on and creating more things will make you better at the thing. There was this, I'm not sure if it is a real life experiment or not, but it was a pottery class. So you had 2 groups of people and they were all taking the pottery class, but they had different requirements for the final exam. One of the groups was told that they need to present a single item of pottery, so a single pot that was supposed to be perfect. No one cared when, how, why they did that. It just needed to be perfect. The other group was told that they should create as many pottery items as they could. No one cared about the quality. They just needed to create as much as they could. And they had a fixed timing, so for example, a week or 2. When the exam time came, it was really weird to see that the best items of pottery were not in the group that needed to create a single item, but in the group that needed to create as many items as possible. And the explanation that the pottery master gave at the end of the exam was that people who needed to create as many as they could had some hideous items, like awful. You would never guess that it was a pot by the looks of it. But since they created as many as they could, they got better in their craft by practice, so their work got better and better. And this is how they achieved something that was not perfect, it was just good. On the other end of the spectrum, the other group, which needed to create a single item, was pondering on that single item over and over again for the whole time they had to create something. So they were trying to perfect a single item without something to compare it with, which led to substandard quality. If you have issues understanding this one, let me explain something, the same thing in a different example. Let's say we have 2 painters. One painter doesn't really care how people would regard their work. That painter just paints. So they paint and finish paintings, and they have 1, 2, 3, 100 paintings. There is another painter who actually has a single masterpiece, and they keep on adding, removing, editing. They are just working on their masterpiece, and they want this masterpiece to be used to remember them by. What happens in 5 or 10 years with those 2 painters? Painter 1, who just paints and finishes their paintings, has tons of paintings, for example, like 500. They have created paintings in various styles, formats. They even have sales, and they have gotten very, very good at what they're doing because of a lot of practice. On the other end, Painter 2, who is dedicated on their masterpiece, has 1 to 10 paintings at best, because they want each painting to be perfect, but by limiting themselves to a single painting, they have not moved past the initial moment when we saw the two painters together. So, whereas the first painter with a lot of paintings has a lot of sales because the clients have potential to choose between many, many paintings. They have a lot to choose from, really. In its different styles, different formats, this painter has an impressive portfolio. The other one, the second one, has a single painting and they may not like it. And if they don't like it, it's a 0% chance they could like something that's non-existent. Plus, this painter takes way too long time to create anything and no one likes to wait that much. So, how does that translate into writing? You'll be amazed by how quicker you could get on writing once you get into it. The more you write, the better you become. If you have talent, it will be even better. So, if you have a single thing and you have completed it, it would boost your self-esteem to continue on with the next project, and you'll think to yourself, oh, amazing, so I completed this, I could keep on doing that and I could complete something else. Plus, the more stories you have, the better the chance of you getting readers and or publishers. And I'm not joking here. I mean, people read different things, they read different genres. So the more stories you have, the more likely you are to collect, in inverted commas, readers. And the more likely you are to land an agent or a publisher depending on where you are on the globe. So, real life examples from real life writers. You probably know who Stephen King is. Well, I guess you do. You know that the first book this guy published was not the first book he wrote? Actually, Carrie is book number 4. And I'm not joking here, you can check in Wikipedia if you don't believe me. That guy had written 3 other books before he even got to this one. And it got published. Brandon Sanderson is maybe one of the most extreme cases I've heard of, but this guy has written more than 10 very thick fantasy books before he was even published. He was working as a bricklayer, he was working as a cashier, he was working at a reception at a hotel, and he was writing book after book after book, and no one would want to publish those because he was not writing like Tolkien. And that guy didn't give up. And by the time he got to publishing, he already had 10 books behind his back. So you can imagine that he was 10 times better than when he started. And this is the reason here. And there is a third option. The more books you have, the bigger the chance you could land an agent because you have variety. I know this from Kate Quinn. If you don't know who she is, she's a lovely lady. She writes historical fiction. If you don't know her works, go look her on Goodreads or on Amazon or whatever you want to. She is on the New York Times best-selling authors list, and she's amazing. And when I asked her how she got to an agent and if her first novel, Mistress of Rome, was actually the first one she wrote, she explained to me, well, yes, it was the first one I wrote, but it was not published when I wrote it. And she explained to me that she wrote that in college, and actually 6 to 7 years afterwards, she was querying an agent, and it was for a completely different book, and her agent said that, well, sorry, no, I'm not interested in that. And she was like, okay, but are you interested in this? And she showed them this book. And it was the book that landed her an agent and made her an author, actually. And she is a full-time author, by the way. So you never know how things is going to work, but I would advise that you sit down and write and complete the damn thing. Regardless of what you want to do with it, just complete it. This is thing number one. And if you are needing more than 5 years for that, you're just wasting your time. And I need to tell you this, and I know I sound harsh and demotivating, but it's true. You are wasting your time, and time is the most precious commodity we have here on earth. Don't do this. Don't do this to you. And to your loved ones, you can imagine how straining it could be for any loved one to know that you're striving for something and you don't achieve it for years. I'm not saying you should give up your dreams. No, by no means. If this is your thing, keep on doing that. But be realistic and set some deadlines and some clear goals, because otherwise you could keep on doing that for the rest of your life. You know, there was this really weird moment. I mean, I've been on Instagram recently. I'm trying to promote my Instagram account in some way. So I came across like 2 or 3 ladies who somehow spent like 11 plus years writing something, and they all of a sudden landed an agent, and one of them is on New York Times best-selling list. And I'm wondering, was it that they spent 11 years writing a single manuscript, or was it that it took them 11 years to get to traditional publishing? Because one of the ladies, I'm very proud of her, she has had 500 rejections. 500. I have 30 rejections for my fantasy series before I found a decent, real publisher. 30 other publishing houses turned me down, not this guy. But that's another story. And unfortunately, it doesn't really apply to you if you speak English, because it's mainly related to the Bulgarian publishing environment, and it wouldn't really help you. But anyway, this lady had 500 rejections, so if she spent 11 years, it's probably that she spent like 3 years writing the book, and she spent the rest of those 11 years trying to find a publisher. Or this is how I understand that. The other lady probably did the same, because I don't see the point of having to edit one and the same thing over and over again for 11 years. I'll just hang myself. So I would advise you, just finish that story. If you for some reason cannot finish this story, go on, find another story, start writing it. I usually write a few projects together. So for example, right now I am working on a thriller based on real life events. I'm not going to spoil what, just in case my Bulgarian listeners are also listening to this. I don't want them to know what exactly the topic is until I finish it. But I'm working on other things as well at the same time, because I get bored with only a single project. So have a second project, but just for God's sake, finish something. And let me repeat, if you don't have a finished thing, there is zero chance you can become a writer, because publishers, agents, readers are looking for finished stories. Yes, you can captivate readers with an ongoing story, I agree with that, but you should commit to completing it, because readers are not as patient as you think they are. So this is one of the things. Sorry. Today my English is kind of failing me. So, one of the other things you need to know before becoming a writer, apart from not trusting Hallmark movies, is that if you are universally unknown, very few traditional publishers will even bother looking at you. So, in the Bulgarian version of this audio, I did a very long explanation and description of how my journey as a writer had developed. But I'm not going to talk about this here because your reality may not be the same as mine. But I'll just try to be brief and keep this audio below an hour. But anyway, let me try and do this. So first of all, if you are unknown, publishers don't care. At least Bulgarian publishers don't care. And the reason why they don't care is that sorry about that. I'm not re-recording this. I'm just constantly doing absurd things. Anyway, so if you are not famous already, either as an author or as someone who is a household name, or you have a fandom, there is a very slim chance of a publisher working with you, I mean traditional publishing, where they pay for everything. And the reason behind this, because they pay for everything, which means that you are very huge, I mean very huge, I'm saying this on purpose, operational risk, which means that they will need a lot of money to create image for you. They will need a lot of money to market your books because no one knows you exist. They will need a lot of money and a lot of connections to sell your books. And this compared to a very famous author where they just buy the rights for the book and they translate it is much easier, because there they get the cover design, they just pay for a translator. That author already has reputation and readership, and they just start getting money way quicker and it's guaranteed. Whereas working with you doesn't guarantee them money. I know it's insulting. I hate to say this. I learned this the hard way. I was devastated when I found out it's like that, but it is like that. And the only thing we can do is to know what we are getting. And this is why, I'm not sure how it is where you live. Feel free to share some details with me. But if you have to work with a traditional publisher, you are waiving away some of the rights you have as an author. It could be either they have the rights to the book, which is absurd, but I know it's common outside of Bulgaria, probably in the US. You will have zero control how and whether this book would be distributed. If it would have an ebook, a paperback, hardcover, audiobook, you don't have control over that. You will have little to no control towards the final look of the book, and especially the cover design, which really kills me. I love to see my covers in advance. I love to be in control and charge. So this is something I am adamant about. You will probably get some payment, and unless your book makes X amount of sales, you will never see any money back from that. And afterwards, the issue here is that you will be expected to help with advertising, as at least in Bulgaria it's like that. So even if the publishing house is paying for everything, they will stop advertising your book, especially if it is a big publishing house. They will stop advertising your book after a month. So your book is released 1 month, and afterwards you're on your own. If you sell something, amazing, but you just get a percentage. You're not getting the full price because you signed a deal, right? So you should actually ask yourself if you're willing to go down that lane. So I've been following a lot of authors on YouTube, especially, and what I've heard so far is that in the English-speaking market, it's actually way more profitable to go with either a hybrid publisher or self-publish. I'll explain the difference between those three in another audio, so don't worry if you don't understand that at this point. But let me say just very quickly right now that if you go with a hybrid publisher or self-publish, you will have expenses and the marketing will mostly be on you, but you will have way more control on what happens with your book in the end. And this is very important, at least to me. Well, there may be people who just want to publish and they don't want to mess with that book any more at any point in their lives. I have such writer friends and they write amazingly. They just want to be published traditionally. To have the pressure of marketing and the pressure of selling taken away from them. And I understand them, because I was like that when I started, and when I found out that if I want the publishing house to take care of everything for me, it doesn't happen. And this is where the Hallmark movies are so detrimental, is because they actually promote the traditional publishing method, which is great, but it's so outdated that it no longer works like the way it worked in the movies. So, for example, for Stephen King, back several decades ago, I'm not really sure when Carrie was published, but it was absolutely sure it was several decades ago, like 70s, 80s, not really sure when. So back then it did work. First of all, there was no other option. You had only traditional publishing houses. Second of all, there was no social media, no internet, so you just got the book out, you would go and have some interviews, and that was it. And you could go out and write. Nowadays it's not the same. You need to compete with a lot of mediums, and actually traditional publishing houses are taking away profit from you, but they are giving very little back. It really depends on what you're aiming at. As I said, I'll be going in detail about this in some other audio, but to me it's not really worth waiving the whole thing, because, mind you, I need to repeat that again, you have to have some readers or fandom, and ideally be famous to get a publishing deal from a traditional publishing house. It's not the same with literary agents, by the way. I know that in the English-speaking world you need an agent. You cannot approach publishing houses directly, so there it's a different story, a completely different story I unfortunately know very little about. I'm talking about any environment when you approach publishing houses directly. When you do so, they actually don't care about how good your writing is. They care if they can sell it. And I know this is insulting. This is absolutely insulting to me as an author, but they do that. And if you ask me, this is something that should stop, but probably wouldn't, because they care about profit. And if you can't provide profit, they don't really care about the artistic value of the thing. So that is something I really don't like, but it is what it is. And here is the catch. If you are famous enough to have a fandom of your own, if you have a pool of readers that could buy your book, why do you need a traditional publishing house to tell you what to do and be their puppet? You are famous already, and if you have fandom, you have guaranteed sales already. So you can go on with any type of publishing you like, and this is the catch-22 in the whole story. You need to be famous in order to get traditionally published, but in order to get traditionally published, you should already be famous. So if you are famous, you will have supposedly more success. But success is actually built on you being out there and publishing things and people reading your things. And I'm saying this as a person who started publishing my writings online, let me calculate, it was in 2018, the beginning of 2018, I started publishing things. So that's 6 years already, and believe me, readers come in slowly when you are not famous. And it is a rule, because if you don't know that this writer exists, you're not very likely to read something from them. But if you start learning about that writer, you may start reading their books. But it takes time. Good thing is that if one reader reads something from author A, they may read something from author B, who writes in the same genre. So it's not like you have a single cake, and if you cut the cake, there are less pieces left for the other people there. No, it's not like that. It's the total opposite. But you need to be consistent, you need to hang on there, and you need to be patient. I hate to say that, but you'll need a lot of patience, regardless of the way you're published. But don't really expect that the first publishing house you write to would be the publishing house that publishes you. I really wish this for you. Like, good luck if you do that. That would be amazing, but don't really count on that because it rarely happens. I mean, I don't know a person like that, and I know a lot of writers. The other thing that it's absurd about Hallmark movies is the way success is depicted. And I didn't really tell this to my Bulgarian-speaking readers, but I'm going to tell this to you for reasons that I think it would serve you better than them. You know, usually Hallmark movies end with a scene where we have a book premiere in a huge bookstore, and the bookstore is filled with fans. And you have this aspiring author, now a published writer, who sits at a desk and signs books. And it's an amazing scene because this is something everybody who has ever written something craves. But here is the thing. Your first book signing is probably going to be a flop. It isn't the way it happens in real life. So don't really expect tons of sales the first time you publish a book unless you work yourself in sales. Don't really expect hordes of fans. I really wish that for you. Don't get me wrong. I wish that for you. It just doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen because people like to read, buy, and be seen with things that are trendy because people are sheep. And are stupid as sheep, no offense. So if you're not trendy for some reason, don't really expect people flocking to you. And by the way, don't even trust people who know you, because people have this very weird way of saying, oh, I can't wait to see your book. I can't wait for it to be out. Believe me, they're not going to buy it. I've had those cases. It was very discouraging at the beginning, and then I realized that they are just saying this to be polite, not because they care about my book. So I stopped talking about my book. In fact, the people who are my most faithful readers and fans are 90% people that do not really know me in real life. So we haven't met in real life first, and they have become my readers afterwards. It was the other way around. We met through my writing, and they became my friends afterwards. And to be even harsher with truths, the first and only to date book premiere I did was for my first book. It's about the story is a thriller on real events based on the disappearance of Chris Kremers and Lisanne Fron in the jungle of Panama. It's called 112, like the emergency number. And I got this opportunity to have a book premiere the year that the book was out, which was 2021. And the issue here was that it was a COVID year, so at that time there were a lot of issues with health certificates and wearing masks inside and whatnot. It was in December, and I had deliberately chosen a Saturday to have more people come in. And unfortunately, on the day of this book premiere, so for people outside, I mean for people who were probably watching my social media, this book premiere must have been a success. To me, it was a complete flop. And it was a flop for several reasons. Yes, I was lucky not to have to pay for catering and to pay for rent of the place. We were doing that, so I had a friend help me out with this. But unfortunately, I was still caught in promotion, inviting people, being frustrated about the whole event because this was the first book signing and the first book premiere I had, and it really didn't ring well with me when in the evening I had two people who were my 100% readers because they already had the book. So one of them was a writer friend, the other one was a colleague from work. I had two other people who have come because of the invitation online, and mind you, I did paid promotion for this, and I did a book trailer, and I did a lot of things in the very little time I had. I even arranged to have this promoted in media. And so, two readers of mine 2 people who came by the invitation, and 3 more who just came in because outside was cold and they had zero idea what was going on. So those roughly 7 to 8 people were the whole audience I had for this book signing. Needless to say, I didn't sell a single book that evening. And it left me really disappointed, not only in the people I had invited, but in the whole process, that basically it was way too much for nothing. So don't really expect crowds. And when I had a call with my publisher to complain about how little people have come, he explained to me that even the biggest publishing houses can get like 30 to 40 people to such events. So it's not just me, it's a trend, at least in Bulgaria. So I was actually told that in bigger cities, so for example, if you go to Berlin, if you go to London, there are way more people, so there is a higher chance of more people turning up. But the smaller the town, the less the people would turn up, unless it's a very small town and this is the only event that evening. So don't really expect crowds. Don't get discouraged when you don't have crowds, because there are silent fans. There are a lot of people who actually read your writing and they don't tell you for some reason, because they think you know your writing is awesome, because they are afraid to talk to you, whatnot. I had this issue for a long time. For example, when I started publishing online my fantasy series, I thought no one is reading that. So one of the first fans I had were actually shrinks to me. And when I announced that I want to have it published on paper, physical copies, a lot of people I never suspected were reading me turned out and said, "Oh, I want a copy." We'll see how many copies they actually want, but that would happen in another audio. So another thing I want to tell you is that you should be persistent, and that being a writer is stressful. So Hallmark movies present that as if it is easy and it's fun, but it's essentially not as fun as you think. I mean, to me, it's amazing to be able to write a story and to have that story being read by other people. I mean, this is awesome, having the characters tell you the story. But there is the downside of it all, and the downside is mainly the fact that you need to deal with people. I'm sorry I need to break it down to you, but if you are writing, there is no way to stay completely anonymous and to escape from meeting readers either virtually or in person, from signing copies, from having people know things about yourself. Here's the catch. I mean, I know that most writers, well, not all writers, but some of them, are actually people who are introverted. So we think that we write something and whatever we have written, it should speak for itself. But unfortunately, things don't work like that. So yes, your writing may be amazing, but the more you publish things either online or on paper, the more people would want to know more about you. And this is the moment when things get complicated, because you will need to share details about yourself. I mean, maybe not everything, but you will need to share something. You will need to let people know who the person behind the whole story is. And no, unfortunately, our story does not speak for itself unless we stand out there and we advertise it. And I fucking hate to say this. I mean, this is something I don't like, but we need to do it. It's a necessary evil, so to say, and you need to do that. If you're not prepared to do any promotion or advertising, I have bad news for you. You're not going to sell a single fucking copy unless you have a person who's very good at marketing and they are helping you promote the book. But anyway, you cannot escape being in the limelight at some point. You need to do that, otherwise people will not know who you are, they will not be able to relate to your work, and yes, there will be a moment when they will like your work and they will start paying attention to what you do as a person. And this is a very tricky moment because it means that from the person X, who is a private person, does this and this and that, and nobody cares, you are turning not into a celebrity but into a semi-public figure, which means that whatever you do, if it is public, can reflect on your reputation and on the way people perceive you. I know it's a bit scary, but as long as you make a point not to express extreme opinions on anything, by anything I mean literally anything, and as long as you try to keep your private life as private as you can, you should be okay. You just need to remember that your actions are being watched. Well, depending on how active you are on social media, there will be different degrees of being watched. I'm not saying that you have the paparazzi outside of your house, but you will still have to take notice that you're not exactly being alone and you're not the way you used to be. And this is because some people have started to notice your writing. Mind you, if you're working with a traditional publishing house, you may be obliged to make some public appearances to, for example, events they have arranged for you, or interviews or things like that. If you don't work with a traditional publishing house, you will need to arrange those yourself, and this is stressful. Marketing is stressful, especially if you, like me, know zero things about it. When I published my first book, I thought I knew something about marketing. And it turned out that I had a very vague idea of how to market things, and I had absolutely no idea of how to market a book, and that backfired big time the first year. I was struggling to become a published writer and sell books because I'm good at writing things. I mean, I write quickly, I finish them quickly if I set my eyes on that. But unfortunately, I suck at selling, and it's not only selling books, it's selling in general, because I have this creator mindset, and it's usually creators are not exactly the most amazing traders, not traitor, the one who betrays people, but trader, the one who trades. Sorry about my pronunciation today. So you have this, and you have another thing which is very important, and this is that you need to make a consistent effort. So it's not a race, there is no finish line, it's a marathon. The thing that I keep repeating is that books do not have expiration date. So the more books you have, the better for you, because the more readers you can get. So you will need to promote them consistently and for a long period of time, and you need to get used to that, because if you don't, I'm sorry my friend, but you're not going to sell much. And it's hard. If you start relearning from scratch and there is no one to help you with, it is hard. But you need to learn that, because this is the only way people have invented to have selling books, unfortunately. So this is something you should keep in mind. I know it's bad. I know it's something you don't really expect. I mean, for example, one of the reasons why those are audios and not videos is that I don't want to be in front of the camera, which is a paradox, because I am a photographer myself. So I know how to take pictures of myself to look okay, not pretty, because I'm not pretty, but okay. I know how to record a video of myself and look fine. I just don't want to. Plus, the focus of this video is for me to get the message across, and not for you to see my face. It doesn't really matter how I look like at this point. It only matters of what you understand of this audio. And I really want to make a point that this thing is important, because it should have you thinking at the end of this. We're kind of close to the end, and I was hoping that this one would be shorter than the Bulgarian version, but it's actually almost identically long, which is fun. But anyway, I really want to share this information with you, only to point out to you that being a writer is not all glory. It's not an easy path. It is straining. Believe me, the editing and publishing process gets on my nerves every fucking single time. It's not the writing. I'm fine with the writing. I can write whatever you want me in any time you want me. I have issues with the editing part. I have issues with the publishing part because it's connected to a lot of expectations that need to be met. It's connected with a lot of people, so you depend on those people, and there's nothing you can do. I mean, there are things outside of your control, which is totally absurd, but it is. You cannot do it all yourself, and it requires a lot of mental strength. It drains your brain. Right now, for example, at the time of recording this video, I'm waiting for 3 of my fantasy series books to be published, and it drives me nuts because my publisher is late again. Hi, if you're listening to this, I know you're late. We'll have a call later today. And I'm frustrated about that. I have a book to finish. I am halfway through the book, and I had set the ridiculously tight deadline to finish it by the end of the week. Let's see if I can manage that, because I'm effectively procrastinating the whole day recording this audio, but it would be video for the YouTube channel, and doing marketing work, but I haven't written a single word today. So we'll see if I'm going to do that, but this is also unnerving in some way. I'm also kind of worried about other things I need to do, so it really requires a lot of mental strength and stamina, because as I said, it's not a race. There is no finish line. So when you publish the book, it's just the beginning. The rest of the things are yet another step of the race. So what should I tell you about? I mean, I really want to have you think, if after all that you heard about, that writing is not easy, that getting published is difficult because publishers have their own set of rules, and those rules are not necessarily in our favor. Actually, they are into our harm most of the time. That marketing sucks and you need to learn it, otherwise you're out. That you need to finish your stories and you need to have at least 1 full manuscript before even considering getting published. And that being a writer is not exactly the way to get rich or the way to be world famous. So on the rich and world famous, I know you have probably at least 1 or 2 authors in mind. So for example, George Martin, J.K. Rowling, Stephen King, and things like that. But how many authors, apart from those 4 or 5 people we all know, have gotten to such fame? I mean, worldwide. How many? Not many, right? And actually, the first author who became a millionaire was not George Martin and was not Stephen King. It was J.K. Rowling. And you know why? Because of a few coincidences. First of all, first coincidence, her work has been read by the daughter of a Steven Spielberg, we all know. And his daughter loved the story of the boy so much that they turned it into not 1 but several movies, which is why it turned into a franchise. The story wouldn't have been published at all if the 8-year-old child of one of the editors at the publishing house that afterwards published the series had read what she had sent, her writing, because the editor was too tired and didn't really like it. So he kept that home because he wanted to return it to the publishing house. And the child found the manuscript, read it, and said, "Daddy, this one is interesting. Why don't you publish it? It's a very interesting book." So those are a lot of coincidences, right? Let's say she was lucky in that respect, but not everyone is like that. So we shouldn't really measure ourselves with those people because they are one of a kind. This makes them unique, so I wouldn't really go for that, but rather be realistic. So yes, writing could be a very good side income, but the English-speaking publishing world is quite expensive. So Be prepared to pay some money for editing, cover design, and loads of money for marketing if you want to see your book out there. So don't really expect to be a millionaire after you have had your first book, and keep on trying. So I will repeat what I said in the beginning, that I'm saying all those things so that you don't really need to learn them the hard way. I want to tell you that there is no Santa now, so that you don't really cry when you find out on your own that there is no Santa. And I want to tell you all those things in a single audio, because if you hear those and you decide that you're not going to write anymore, which is perfectly fine if you think this is not your thing, you can have them all in one place. You don't need to wait for another episode of the series, and you can just move on with your life and find something better that suits you. On the other hand, if those things are things that they may be scary, but you don't really see them as deal breakers, you can keep on doing this, and you can get better knowing those things way earlier than I did. Because one of the reasons I'm doing those series, I said that and I explained it very, very, very detailed, in a very detailed way. In the Bulgarian version, is that when I started writing, no one told me this. There was no one to turn to. There was no one who would tell me everything I'm telling you now in this manner. Yes, there are like 2 possible sources, and none of them had this information in it. And this is why I'm recording this, because I want other people who are out there starting to write to have an option. Because if you know what you're going to encounter, you will have the choice to say yes to the thing or no to the thing. But you will save time, because usually information costs you time, nerves, experience, emotions, and things like that. So I am basically providing something that has cost me 7 years of emotions and nerves and failures, a lot of failures. And yeah, so I hope you take something from that. See you next time, and I really hope you got to this end of the audio. Bye bye.